August Australia and New Zealand PowerShell user group meeting. On the slide there I've got links to our Twitter and Meetup pages, but also in this past month we got a static site via GitHub.io. Basically we'll use that to link to past meetups, recordings, and also have a bit of a schedule for future meetups and which presenters we've got scheduled in. So, as far as who we are, there's 3 of us co-organising these meetups. There's myself, Josh King, Adam Murray, and Charbel. So, of course, this is Australia and New Zealand. I'm the New Zealand part of the equation, and Adam and Shar are Australia. And where that comes in is next month we're going to be doing next month we're going to be doing next month we're going to be doing our first in-person meetups, and that plural was intentional. There's going to be one in New Zealand and one in Australia. They'll both start at 6 PM local time, so the New Zealand one will start about 2 hours before the Australian one. At this stage we're targeting the 10th of September, which is a Monday. And yeah, we'll try and record both meetings, possibly live stream them, but that's going to depend on the venues they end up being at. And yeah, keep an eye on the meetup. There will end up being 2 events listed, one for each country. And as for tonight, so as soon as we've finished with this intro, I'll jump into a quick lightning demo on my BurntToast module, which basically this is going to be practice for the PowerShell, I forget what it's called, Power Hour that Warren Frame and co are planning for later this month. And then after that we'll have Bryce talking about AWS Identity and Access Management with PowerShell. And be sure to thank Bryce for showing up, because it is, I think, 3 AM where he is, which is pretty early. So, we'll jump straight into this lightning demo. So, the time slots for these are 10 minutes long, and basically I'm hoping to for it to be closer to 5 to 7 minutes to keep things running quickly. So this is easy desktop notifications with BurntToast. So this is a module that's both on GitHub and on the PowerShell gallery, so you can install it using install module. Obviously I've already got it installed here, and first demo is the command to get a notification showing up. So if I run that, you'll see the toast notification pop up down here. So this is the native notification framework in Windows 10 and technically Windows 8, but I no longer support that. So yeah, you run the new BurntToast notification command, and this is the default notification you get. Obviously that's a little bit boring, so the first thing you'll likely want to do is get some custom text going. So through all of these I'm using splatting so I don't run over the side of the screen, but there's a text parameter, and you can provide a array to that parameter, and the first argument is always going to end up being your bold title at the top of the notification, and then any other items you add are going to show up as standard text underneath that. So if we run this one, you can see there's the title, there's the rest of the text, and then this is just telling us the source of the notification. And we'll see all of my toasts at the end of this have been grouped under a single heading. So after that, we start playing with sounds. So there's a lot of sounds built into Windows that you can use. If I quickly have a look here, you can see it has auto-completion here for you, so you can select something that you know is going to work. There's IM mail, a whole bunch of alarms. For this one, we're using the second alarm one, and I've got a loopback working here so that you'll be able to hear this annoying noise, but I won't. So enjoy. Yeah, and I'll stop that. So yeah, the call and the alarm sounds automatically loop, and when you use them, your notification is going to stay on the screen for a lot longer. So the ideal scenario for those is like incoming calls or alarms like that. It's things that you want people to see and acknowledge, but whereas a shorter notification is just information and they can come back to it later in the action center. The next thing we can do is buttons. Oh. That might be an issue that I'm not sure I can fix. Actually. Yeah, it might be depending on the layout you're using in Skype. Maybe switch the view to content view instead of gallery, something like that. Up the top, you should see something. Yeah. So, buttons. This is getting into a second command now. So, basically, new BT button or BurntToast button. And we provide a couple of arguments to get the to generate the button. The first is content. This is the actual text that shows on the button itself, and the argument is what you want the button to open. So at this stage, basically, you can open a website or you can open a file, and what it's going to do is basically send that file through Windows, and Windows is going to open up that file in whatever your default application for that is. So for example, a text file for me would open in Notepad++, CSV file is going to open in Excel. So we'll generate the button, which you won't see much on the screen because it's just being assigned to a variable. But then when we create our toast, we provide that button we've created as an argument on the toast itself. So this is the sort of toast I would have if I was generating a report that for whatever reason took hours. In this tongue-in-cheek example, it apparently took 6 hours. So I don't necessarily want to keep an eye on the script generating that. I just want to see a notification when it's done. And the beauty of this is I see the report of how long it took, but I also have a button I can quickly click and it'll open up for me. So that's just a dummy CSV I was using for a different demo. Yeah, so that's buttons. The next thing that people start diving into when they do start looking at toast notifications is progress bars. So much like the button, there's a new BT progress bar function. You can give your progress bars statuses and values. That value is a double, and it represents a value from 0 to 100%. And like the button, we can assign that variable to the toast notification. And in this example, I've also given it a unique identifier. That uniquely identifies the toast, and as we go through the rest of the demo 6 and 7, what that's going to allow us to do is, as we provide new toasts with the same unique identifier, the toast is going to get updated, rather than giving us a different additional toast. So we run that. We can see the standard text has come along as we've indicated in the demo5 toast variable. But now we've also got this progress bar here showing that it's currently generating the report and it's 20% done. So if we jump to demo 6, basically what we're doing now is updating that value to 0.6 or 60% and sending the toast out again with report 1 as the unique identifier. So we run that. You can see it's popped the toast back up, but if we look in the Action Center, we're only seeing the 60% toast. So this 60% one has effectively deleted the 20% and replaced it with this one. And again, we can send another toast with that same identifier, and we should see it still there. Good. So when we run this one, not only is it going to update the progress bar, but it's also going to add a button to open up that report. So there we go, 100% complete, and open report. And that'll open Excel again for us. So, final demo. Let's close that to make some space. This is a really awesome use case that I saw on Reddit, and I've sort of started running with it since then. Basically, this is, so you've got an API for your printer, and you can pull toner levels from it. You can wire up your own monitoring for it, and then send yourself an alert when one of the toners are getting low and it needs to be replaced. So basically, we're using progress bars to indicate the levels for each of the colors, and then we can provide multiple progress bars to the progress bar parameter and send that through to a toast notification. So if we run that, you can see it's stacked up the different colors. One thing to note here is it's showing the display text 75% for each of the colors. This one here, however, it's saying basically full, and that's because of this value display that I've popped up here, which just overrides it. So by default, it'll translate your 0.75 double into a percentage. Yeah, and I think I ran slightly over time there, but you can find the repo for this module on GitHub at github.com/windows/BurntToast. If you've got any feature requests, bugs, anything, fire them through, or hit me up on Twitter at WindowsNZ. I always love hearing use cases, and yeah, bug reports definitely help me steer where I'm should be focusing on when I'm working on it. So that's easy desktop notifications. Bryce, are you ready to go?
Yeah. Awesome. And I'm awake, which is good.
That's good. I'll stop presenting if you want to share your screen whenever you're ready, and take it away.
Let me just do a little bit of cleanup here.
Sure.
And all right. Looks like I might be thinking. Can you guys see my screen?
It's loading.
Okay.
And yep, it's come through now.
All right. Cool. So I know AWS is something that a lot of folks in the Windows world, and especially just because we have Azure, we in the PowerShell world, we don't really get too deep of a look into Amazon Web Services. And one of the easiest ways to get involved, especially with PowerShell is to start using the identity and access management module, which is something that PowerShell is really built well to do, and really just lets you help manage this environment quite a bit. So I actually, in a previous role, was kind of thrown into the middle of AWS project, and using PowerShell was really able to pick it up, run with it, and really not blink. So I really strongly encourage anybody who has the opportunity to, get their hands into AWS to maybe sign up for a free tier account, poke around on it a little bit, and you'll see as well, I hope, that it's not as intimidating as some people make it out to be. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and dive into the identity and access management module within Amazon Web Services. So that was the base page that we just left. If you log in, that's usually what you'd end up seeing. And actually, just for fun, in case anybody hasn't seen this before, you can see all of the AWS services from this page. So depending on what all you're working on, what all you're doing, you can access that service from just that base dashboard. Of course, your most recently visited will be up here at the top. And these are my 4 easily most visited. EC2, that's basically like your compute resources. S3 is basically your storage. And then CloudFormation lets you do some orchestration between, all of your different resources using templates, and makes it really easy to deploy applications to scale. But yeah, so let's dive into that IAM module, that Identity and Access Management module. And from here, we can see that we do have quite a few items that we can play with. We have groups, we have users, roles, and policies. And, this isn't too different from any traditional Windows domain. Of course, you can add users to groups. The one interesting thing about Amazon Web Services is you cannot nest your groups. So you do have to explicitly call each user that you want to have in your groups. Some people think that is a little bit of a limitation, but I think that a properly managed AWS environment shouldn't have too many users or too many groups to make that unmanageable to begin with. And hopefully I'll be able to show you why that is here pretty soon. So just for fun, let's hop over to the PowerShell side of the house. And, this is pretty much everything that we're going to be talking about today. What we're going to do, let's just go ahead and create a group. And the only prerequisite that we have to be able to run any of this, of course, is that we have our AWS PowerShell module installed. But then also that we have a administrator user. And actually, let me show you what that looks like. If it lets me. Here we go. What I do, rather than using the root account, so whenever you create your AWS account, you do get a root account, and that has, of course, access across the entire spectrum of everything. One way to add just a quick one layer of security, of course I'm logged into, and yeah, have fun with this, but I'm logged into my AWS environment, my free tier environment with my root account, but anything that I'm using the API for, anything that I'm using AWS PowerShell for, I'm using this administrator user that I've created, and this user will actually, we can do some measure of access control on him, or her, I guess. But yeah, you can, say, lock this account. You can change the access key. So if I were to accidentally leak my private key, basically your security credentials, if I were to accidentally delete that, here's like my public key. I also have a private key for it. If I were to accidentally delete that, never fear, I can always change it. I can always deactivate previously used keys. So there's tons of stuff that I can do to make sure that even in a demo, you guys can't access my accounts, which is pretty fun. So yeah, that being said, let's go back to PowerShell. And here, probably our first step that we ought to do is create a group. And the easiest way to create a group is actually just to use the new IAM group commandlet using a group name. And I use something a little bit unique here, and this is just my personal preference, but this path parameter is actually not mandatory whenever you're creating groups or users within AWS. But I like to use them because if we do end up having a lot of users or a lot of groups, it becomes a little bit easier to manage. And I'll show you how that works here in a minute. But just for fun, let's go ahead and create. Let's go ahead and create that group. And of course, you see I get a response back with an ARN, or that is an Amazon resource number. Each item within AWS has a unique number, and that ARN is really important if you start using newer modules, if you start using different modules. You can use that ARN to specify particular unique resources to use, across different services. But basically, what I'm getting at with that is anytime you get an ARN back, it's a really good thing because that means that whatever you did was successful and whatever you did has that unique resource number. So going back here, we could use PowerShell to show you, but sometimes just looking at it in the GUI just makes you feel good. So as you can see in my groups, not only do I have my administrators group, I also have my Chicago engineers group, and right now we don't have any users for that. So just for fun, I'm also going to create my Chicago engineer 01, great guy. And as you can see, again, we got that ARN, that unique number back. So that is really good. We have that create date. Yeah, wonderful time. And with that, again, we use that path, and I just like to use, maybe a region, and then whether that's a user or a group. With that path, you can use a lot of different things, and I'm just about to get to that. But for fun, let's go back over here to users, loading. So we have my administrator, that's who I'm using to manage all of this. And then, of course, I have my Chicago Engineer 01. He's the guy who I just enabled right now. So good. And the reason why I like to use paths is because what we can do is actually look at our user list. So if we pipe this in to that users variable, what we're going to get, and I'll expand this window a little bit, what we're going to get is a list of all of the users within our AWS account. So again, we have that administrator account, we have the Chicago Engineer 01 account, and you can look, and for my administrator account, I just put that in the root path, but for my Chicago Engineer 01 user, I have it in the Chicago users path. And if I wanted to, what we could do is write a simple little script. Basically, for every user in our user list that we generate, we can grab their username and then pipe that into we will pipe that into the where object commandlet, looking for that path of Chicago users. And this is why within an organization, it's a really good idea for you to, actually I might end up changing this to a like. Sorry, hot edit. So this is why in your organization you might want to have like a standard nomenclature on how you would end up naming these users, but or using those paths. But you could see how if you had 18 different users, you just wanted to keep track of your engineers in Chicago, so you assign 6 of them this path, it would be an easy way to manage more accounts at scale. So let me go ahead and run this, and of course, yeah, once we get that back, this is a pretty small scale example, but you can see that between the two users that I have in this account, whenever I run this little ditty here, I do get back just my Chicago user of my Chicago Engineer 01. But if we wanted to, we could add a whole bunch more users. Some of them could be from Chicago, others could be from, I don't know, probably Sydney. And from there, we could say, okay, who are my Australian engineers, who are my Chicago engineers, be able to separate them. But that's a simple little script that you can do to query your users based on that path location. I feel like it's a pretty underutilized piece of the IAM module, but it's really useful to managing those users. Of course, creating users, creating groups is all good, but eventually we'll want to add those users to groups, and the nomenclature for that is really simple. Just add IAM user to group, specify that user that you'd like, specify that group that you'd like. And again, this is one of those where, if we were to query them by their path, we could then pipe these users into this add IAM user to group. So that way I could put, all of those Chicago engineers in the same group at the same time. But once we do this, let's go back to that console, and looking under groups, we can now see that my Chicago engineers has one user, which is good. I hope that would be the case. And we can see that that user is the Chicago ENG 01. Awesome. So we have him in here now. I can also look at those users from the command line, basically just get IAM group, specify that group name, and then call that user's method on it. And again, here we have that Chicago ENG 01 user. You'll notice again that ARN, that Amazon resource number, is specified with every resource that we have in here, whether it's a user, a group, a role, a policy, a S3 bucket, really anything. It does have that ARN. So as long as you're getting that ARN back, that's really good. Anything else that's included with that, like a username, is really just a bonus for you, for your purposes. All right. So with that, does anybody have any questions about user group creation? I haven't been looking. Okay, looks like we're all good so far. But if anybody does have any questions, just do let me know. Do stop me. I do tend to kind of blow through some topics pretty quickly. Okay, so now comes the fun part, creating users, creating groups. That's all pretty standard. Querying users, querying groups is pretty normal. The next part that gets really fun is actually in the creation of policies and the creation of and the application of those policies to users or groups. And what we end up doing, we can actually write custom policies, or we can register pre-built policies from AWS. And whenever I say policy, I'm really talking about the ability for these users and these groups to be able to access various resources within AWS. So for instance, these are the pre-built policies that are built into AWS. So you can, say, we want to provide full access to AWS services and resources. Just for fun, let's just search for, there should be quite a few. So the way like S3 permissions work is a little bit unique, because not only do you need your users to be able to access the S3 buckets by using one of these policies, but then you also need that user to have permission to access the bucket from the actual bucket itself. So S3 buckets are a little bit fun. What we'll do, let's go ahead and look at this Amazon S3 full access policy. And for our Chicago engineers, let's just say, oh yeah, they're all data engineers. We need them to be able to access, whatever resources we have in S3. So we can go ahead, let's grab this policy ARN, and back in our script here, we can use this register IAM group policy using that policy ARN. And yeah, Josh is probably going to make fun of me for not using splatting, but it's 3 a.m. So I'm just going to run this here real quick. I do have, in case you can't see it, there is a backtick character there, which lets me run this next parameter on the next line. Yeah, so once we register that IAM group policy to that Chicago engineers group, we can then go back to this group, look at Chicago ENG01, and under that, our Chicago engineers group, and under those permissions, we do see that Amazon S3 full access. So now, what we'd need to do in order to grant these users the rest of the access they need to S3 is log into those buckets, update that bucket policy to allow this group ARN to be able to access those buckets. But for now, just giving these guys the S3 access, that's what we want to do. But let's say, rather than just using those pre-built policies, rather than just using what Amazon writes for us, they pretty much have one or two for each of their services. Let's say we want to go ahead and create our own. Now there is a language to being able to write these. Essentially you can use JSON, and within your JSON object be able to specify all of the different IAM, or all of the different AWS resources that you want these users to be able to access. But if you're just getting started out, if you don't really grasp the nomenclature for this JSON object quite yet, what I'd highly recommend that you do is use the visual editor. And the visual editor is a really simple way for you to be able to choose, the service that you want to be able to use. So in this case, let's say these engineers also need some access to the Elastic load balancers. So we'll just give them all access on the Elastic load balancer. And hopefully that'll just let me do that. Sweet. And we'll also say we also need access to EC2, and here we just need to be able to list and read those EC2 actions. And just for fun, oops, looks like this one's giving me a warning as well. So it looks like both of them are giving me a warning. So there is a little bit of a, let me see. I wonder if it'll just let me say all actions here. All right. And what we can do, okay, it might not like me picking random services, but usually what will end up happening is as you, specify items in the visual editor that you want, you then are able to go over to this JSON tab here, and then that will have the full the full statement, the full actual language that happens behind the scenes to getting that created. So just for fun, let's do one that I believe I tested and had it working. Is actually using SageMaker, which is a little bit of a data analysis engine. Oh, and maybe not. All right. So this might really not be liking me this morning, but let me see. Let's see if we can just grab their SageMaker. Okay. So here we have their SageMaker policy. So yeah, here's another way, and sorry, I just kind of walked through that as well. Here's one other way that you can edit these policies. You can import something that AWS manages. So you can import, one of these pre-built policies, and let's say, oh yeah, I like, everything that, say, this one policy does, and just for ease of use, because SageMaker, being a data analysis engine, might not be the best example for this. Just for fun, let's look at EC2. And again, that's just kind of your compute resource. That's kind of your just straight up VM creation service from AWS. And here, now that we have these items, if we hop over to JSON, and perfect. So this will show you, your version. This is just the version of the JSON object that they have created. So even though this is a date quite a bit in the past, that is still perfectly fine. For your statement, you can see all of these various services, the EC2:**. That's going to give you access to everything within EC2. Same with Elastic Load Balancing: $*. That's going to give you access to everything within Elastic Load Balancing. If you did have particular services within each of these AWS resources that you wanted to specify, you could say, for instance, CloudWatch. I'm not sure what would be there, but say we had CloudWatch. Suppose there was something along the lines of, monitoring only. You could specify just access to that one service as opposed to the entire CloudWatch resource. But the way this policy is built, we're getting full access to CloudWatch, full access to autoscaling, and all of this fun stuff. Also, yeah, you can see here, so for the IAM resource, we're only getting access to the create service linked role property within IAM. So what that'll allow us to do is, create specific linked roles within the IAM module, which is pretty fun. So, yeah, it looks like, this is a pretty extensive policy. But suppose we wanted to add anything else, we could then add whatever additional permissions based on, what our resource needed. So just for fun, let me just go ahead and copy all of this whole JSON object. And I am going to change it. And I'm going to put it in this policy.json file. That way I have it handy here for my PowerShell script. And I can use it later on as well. So what we can do then, so what we can do then is actually grab this write IAM group policy commandlet using our group name, our Chicago engineers. That'll be the group that it applies to. And then for our policy name, we can actually just create something like my very unique policy name, give it a date. That way we know when that was created. But then also, whenever we go, here, we'll just change this to policy.json. Also, whenever we go to apply this policy, we do need to specify that policy document. Here, rather than, because we are interacting with the API, rather than just being able to do the traditional PowerShell way of, just giving it a path to that document, letting PowerShell negotiate the rest of it, we do actually have to give it the raw JSON content of that file. So that's the one trick to being able to apply your custom created policies with PowerShell. But once we go ahead and run this, we should see, oops, I need to probably save this. And also change to my appropriate folder. I'm going to chalk that up to 3 in the morning as well. But once we go ahead and write this, then we should be able to head on back to our IAM management console, hit the back button a couple times, go into our groups, and we can see that we have our a very unique policy name, 2018-08-13. And if we wanted to, we could even, look at that policy. We could edit that policy with the visual editor and do anything else that we needed there. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of your policy creation and policy application, whether that is for that pre-built policy or whether that is writing your own. The last thing that we can do, of course, PowerShell has all kinds of git commands to be able to grab information. I'm sorry I was using the GUI for a lot of this. I think with AWS it just feels good to be able to look at items with the GUI, but just keep in mind that for all of these commandlets, we do have the appropriate git verbed command. So for here, we could have git IAM group policies, show that on our Chicago engineers. And you can see that we have that very unique policy name that we applied there as well. So for that, that is kind of your in a nutshell 101 edition of the PowerShell IAM on AWS. And again, if anybody does have any questions, I'm going to hop back over to the chat tab as well. Okay, so it looks like, what if we choose list only? I believe that was in regards to the policy creation, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was just a suggestion about the warnings you were getting.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It's all right. I was going to point it out, but you figured a way around it.
Yep. So yeah, my apologies there. For that, I'll admit I haven't done too much policy creation on my own, just because AWS does provide so much. A lot of times I almost find it easier to use that register group policy based on the ones that they've created, and then just cherry pick the services that I'll be using as opposed to writing my own. However, so I'll also say that my my AWS environments have been pretty light on the user side, because keep in mind, these aren't users that you're letting log into VMs or utilize applications. These are just administrative users to spinning up, spinning down, and playing with AWS resources. So, in the end, most of these teams that I've worked on have been between, probably 20 and 100 people. So a lot of the user management, we end up with a lot of power users. But yeah, basically what we'll end up doing is saying, oh, you need full access to X, Y, and Z service. Let me create you an account for that. This new person will need full access to, A, B, and C resource. So let me create an account for that. And a lot of times we'll end up having multiple accounts for the same people, and then just explicitly giving, whatever accounts are, permissions just to the application that they'd need to use that account for. So then, what are the limits of the AWS PowerShell module? So really the limits aren't necessarily in the module itself. One of the fun bits about the AWS PowerShell, and this is also going to go into Adam's question about PowerShell Core, one of the interesting bits about AWS PowerShell module is it's actually not strictly a PowerShell module. It's actually just interacting with the .NET API on the back end from AWS. So the limitations for the PowerShell module are any limitations that they'd have for their .NET API. The one thing that I've run into, and actually I don't know why I switched back here, I'm not prepped to show you this, but the one thing that I'm actually really sad that they haven't implemented with PowerShell is that the S3 object copying and kind of data movement isn't exactly where I want it to be yet. And the reason why I say that is I've done a lot of large data transfers, and using the AWS command line interface or the AWS CLI, you get this fun command called AWS S3 sync, and it works a lot like rsync on Linux, if you're familiar. Basically, it just compares the hashes of all the files in your source file system and all the hashes of all the files in your destination file system, and just makes them match, which is really fun. So you can do large copies. If your network connectivity gets interrupted, it doesn't really matter. You just kind of relaunch it once you're done, or once you have network connectivity again. PowerShell, just the way the S3 API is written, you do have to explicitly call, I want to transfer file X from, my local file system to S3 or vice versa. So file transfers end up being a little bit of a hassle. It's nothing you can't script around. It's nothing you can't, make up for just with fun PowerShell-y methods. But it's a little bit more difficult than using a simple, one-liner of AWS S3 sync and then getting all of that done, right? So it ends up being, just a little bit more of a hassle, and really just on the data transfer side. In almost every other instance, I found that PowerShell, I prefer it over the AWS CLI, simply because you do get robust objects back, and then being able to manipulate that with PowerShell is very useful, as opposed to with the AWS CLI. It's much more just, a string of text. So you'd have to do some complicated parsing, or you'd have to do some scripting around whatever gets returned from the AWS CLI in order to create more robust scripts to do a little bit more robust management with just that tool. But yeah, all that being said, I do flip back and forth occasionally between the CLI and the PowerShell module, mostly just around, am I doing a data transfer? If so, I use the CLI. If I'm doing anything else, I'll use that PowerShell module. So yeah, I think I briefly mentioned it, but to Adam's question, does it support PowerShell Core? There is. So you can actually install the AWS PowerShell module in two ways. I think it's actually from the if you are just wanting to use the NuGet repository, you can just simply install module, scope, current user. And then the module's name is AWS PowerShell. You can also, for the .NET Core folks, you can install the module, AWS PowerShell .NET Core, I believe is the name of the module. So it does have almost all of the functionality. I actually haven't done too much research. I believe Pratik Singh has an article out there. I'm sure you could Google it and find it within 2 or 3 seconds. But I believe he has an article that compares and contrasts the differences and what you get in the .NET Core module versus the AWS PowerShell module. The nice part is, again, because we're interacting with an API, I don't think there ends up being too much difference between the .NET Core and the regular module. again, because it is mostly just an API interaction. Perfect. And then, do I have any experience with the Azure RM module? Unfortunately, no. I actually haven't, in my experience, had too much of an opportunity to work with Azure. Most of the Azure experience that I have has actually been just with a couple of individual VMs, and I know that's really unsatisfying, and it's a really like non-PowerShell-y thing to say. I'm sorry, but yeah, unfortunately, I don't have too much experience with that Azure RM module. Do you have a specific question about what might be different, or I might be able to do some quick Googling as well, or Binging, depending on who might be sponsoring us in the future.
It's just okay. I was just interested to see if you had a comparison from using them, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, let me see. Could you give me just a quick synopsis of what the Azure RM?
So it's essentially Microsoft's their modules to deal with Azure resources. So if you're interacting with the Azure subscriptions, you'd be using the Azure RM modules to manipulate those resources.
Okay. Yeah, I want to say, kind of the difference, and this will be really just my opinion, so don't quote me on it. But I know I've talked to a couple of people about this in the past. We've all heard the traditional, iPhone versus Android argument of, the iPhone is just really well made. It, is only going to do exactly what it was programmed to do, but it's going to do that very, very well. And it's going to have, a little bit of room for customization, but in large part, you specify what you want, and then that's what you get. And I think that's a pretty good analogy for Azure from what I've heard from the folks who I've talked to who have managed Azure resources. You do have some customization ability. But for the most part, it is a lot of, let me use my commandlet for that and let me just get back exactly what I'm looking for. With AWS, on the other hand, I feel like it's a little bit more like Android. You can really program whatever you want on it. You can really hack it up. You can really, end up destroying an environment really well if you want to, or if you don't know what you're doing. That's kind of the trade-off is with AWS, you do have so many options and you have so many, different things that you could set as a preference. And even with like that JSON object creation, right? If I was to use language that wasn't exact, or if I was to use a wildcard in the wrong place, I'd end up granting way more permissions than I ever really intended. And I think that that's a lot harder to do with Azure, and for good reason, because Azure is very well built. It's not to say that AWS isn't, but I think that AWS has the expectation of, their technical folks being more involved with that kind of JSON language, with that, proprietary knowledge that you just kind of get with working with AWS enough time, right? So that's, I think kind of the trade-off there is, and feel free to yell at me on Twitter about saying this, but yeah, I do think that Azure is more of your iPhone. It's your rock-solid, very good tool that is always going to behave the way you expect it to, whereas AWS is a little bit more like the Wild West of Android. Lots of different flavors, lots of different specifications, lots of different wrangling methods, but in the end you end up with a very customizable environment that you can do literally anything on. And yeah, with the IAM module, that's probably the least customizable. I said this and then I was like, well, maybe my IAM demo might not be the best to demonstrate that. But if you guys want to have me back at some point, I could talk about the Elastic services, like Elastic Container Services, the Elastic Block Storage, all that sort of stuff, which is so customizable. It's insane how much you can specify on those. But yeah, I'd say that would be kind of your big difference. And again, I'll preface that with I have very limited Azure experience, but yeah, that would be your big difference. All right. Any last questions, or did I put everybody to sleep?
Oh, Shah's typing. Someone else is typing.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I'm barely awake, so thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
You planning on going back to bed after this, or are you up for the day now?
No, I'm definitely gonna go back to bed. So I
Good call.
will also say, yeah, I have a 3-month-old, so for me to be up for an hour at 3 a.m. is not
Unusual?
not crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So trust me, give me like 5 minutes and I'll be right back asleep. Thank you all very much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is my first international stage to present on, so I do appreciate that you guys have me. If you do have any questions that you come up with afterward, tweet at me. I'm at _Bryce McDonald on Twitter. You could probably follow me, like if you went to Josh's page or something. You can find me pretty quick. Otherwise, you can also find me on LinkedIn, wherever, whatever works best for you. Just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to you guys about this stuff and keep the conversation going, because I always like to say that a PowerShell user group isn't a 1 hour, once a month thing. It's something that happens all the time, every day. So yeah, just reach out and we can keep it going.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. I'll quickly take over the screen sharing thing, hopefully. All right. So I figured I'd just quickly, to wrap this up, jump back to this slide, because next month is going to be quite different than what we used to, given we've now done 3 virtual meetings, and next month it will be in person. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand and close to Sydney or the Hawke's Bay and can make it, it would be great to meet you in person. We're going to try and record, but the main thing is keep an eye on the meetup and Twitter for details. And if you're ever keen on speaking at one of these meetings, you can hit up any of the 3 of us and we'll find a slot for you. We're keen on first-time speakers or seasoned speakers. We've got a quick slot at the start of each meeting and a longer slot. So yeah, if you're keen, drop us a line and we'll slot you in somewhere. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good month.
See you guys.